Hello again, this is Tim Brewer coming to you from Lomita and Bend United Methodist Churches in Central Texas, serving God faithfully in our small communities, trying to do a big work. We are podcasting about the Bible. We see that a lot of people don't understand or don't know the Bible, the stories, the people, the plot, the events. And so we've started covering a number of different studies in how to understand the Bible. We're going to start a new study today on the parables of Jesus. The parables were an interesting teaching form that Jesus used quite a bit. They're something like the morality tales or the stories that the Greek philosophers gave, but not quite. Some even suggest that Jesus originated this form. He uses the everyday things that people experience and know, the stories that are going around the community, the area, the nation, and he uses them to make a point. They become a window into the nature of God and the way that God's kingdom works. A lot of times when the parable at the time was very shocking because some of the things that were elements were very outlandish and strange. And the shocking part is usually the point. So you always look for the shocking part to understand the parables. Today we're going to talk about the Good Samaritan. That's a story that's made the rounds, and everybody knows the Good Samaritan. There's things like the Good Samaritan's house and the Good Samaritan purse. We talk about somebody being a good Samaritan who stops and helps. The problem is that in biblical times, those two words would not be used together. Good and Samaritan would have been a contradiction. Let me give you a little bit of background. Samaria was a country right next to Israel who tended to do things differently. They were like cousins of the Jews. They followed the basic Jewish faith, but they did it differently. They worshiped in a different place. They didn't worship at the temple like all the good Jews did. They worshiped in the mountain, and they were sometimes accused of being cooperative with the people that invaded them. That they profited or benefited from the invading army and the havoc that was wreaked on Israel. And so Samaritans were generally looked down upon. They were thought of a terrible group of people that nobody associated with. The Samaritans Jews did not talk to Samaritans. And that's kind of the background for the story today. Jesus said there was a man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves. That was, first place, that was kind of unwise to travel by yourself in places where there are robbers and where there are wild animals. It became very easy to fall among thieves that were hidden in the rocks and in the places in the desolate parts of the country. But he was left for dead. They thought they had killed him and they left him. And then a Jewish leader, a Pharisee, a leader came through and they thought, well, here's the rescuer. And he saw the man in the ditch. He passed by on the other side. Now, we don't know why he did that. It may have been because there's a prohibition against touching a dead body that makes you unclean and unable to go into the temple. It may have been that he was just afraid that the robbers were still around and that was a trap. It may have been that he just didn't want to get involved. We don't know. But then he passes by on the other side. So another Jewish, a layperson comes and passes by on the other side as well. And these are people that the common, ordinary folks of Jerusalem some of them would not have looked up to. They were leaders, they were elite. They said, they would have said, that they wouldn't expect them to help. But then the third person came along, and the Jews, probably hearing the story, would have anticipated that it was a Jewish, common, everyday man that would become the hero of the story. But Jesus throws him a curve. He says that along came a Samaritan, the ones who are hated, the ones, if the man in the ditch would have been able to move around and have his own say, he would have not wanted to be associated with the Samaritan. But it is the Samaritan that stopped and picked up the man and tended to his wounds, put him on a donkey and carried him to the nearest inn, where he paid for the man's stay and said as he traveled back through, he would pay any additional costs. So he must have been a merchant, a tradesman that traveled back and forth up and down the road. And he promised to settle any debt so that it wouldn't be a burden to anybody else. He went way out of his way, more than anyone would have expected. And this was a story connected with who is my neighbor. And the one who asked, the lawyer who asked the question, he was asked, who is my neighbor? And it was obviously the Samaritan. It was obviously everyone who heard the story, but nobody wanted to admit it. So the curve is that the person that they least liked, the person that they least wanted to help, that least wanted to be the hero of the story, is exactly who the hero of the story is. And in some ways, that is like Jesus, who was the expected Messiah, but he wasn't expected in the way he came. He was expected to come with a league of angels coming behind him to take over the territory and to throw the Romans out and create a Jewish kingdom again. But he didn't do that. So he was the least likely person, the least likely Messiah who was born as in natural ways that people are born, grew up and was among them and was a carpenter and a stonemason, so that that's not who they would have expected, and that ends up being the hero of the story. So look for Jesus to tell the stories that are shocking, and that was the shocking part. You can add your own ending to that, into what person would be the least likely, maybe the least one that you want to help you out. But we're in the ditch. We are in desperate need of somebody coming along and giving us a helping hand. Maybe it's Jesus. All right, well, I'll see you next time.